1 + 1 = avocado is a very human thing because you have creativity. You're like, I never saw that coming. Oh, it's a machine that thinks. No, it's not thinking. You think, I think, we're humans. It doesn't think. I always tell my students, like, if you find somebody you don't like, or if you find an issue that scares the heck out of you, go into it.
Lean in.
Run at it, right? Figure out why.
I love that where you've landed is the magic is where rules don't apply.
So for me, I think we're having the wrong conversation when we're talking about AI. We're not talking about the human beings that are using AI, the corporations that are using AI. We're not talking about the power structures of AI.
Welcome to Rules Don't Apply, where we're speaking with pioneers, provocateurs, and purveyors of non-conventional wisdom. Recorded alongside a live audience at South by Southwest Sydney, this series seeks to redefine the art of the possible. Because for those looking to navigate what's next, the rules of today may just no longer apply. We have an absolute juggernaut of an intellect coming to have a chat to us today on Rules Don't Apply. I have the distinct pleasure of being sat next to what has been clearly, I think, one of the most lauded sessions of South by Southwest so far, Professor Brian David Johnson. For those of you playing at home, BDJ, as he is affectionately known, is a man that has made the future his business. From 2009 to 2016, he was the Intel Corporation Futurist in Residence. Currently, he is the professor and futurist in residence at Arizona State University Global Futures Lab, and currently the director of ASU's Threat Casting Lab. That sounds ominous. He is prevalent in private practice across a huge range of groups, including government, military, corporation, non-profit. You've done a whole bunch of stuff with NATO as well,
Yep.
I've heard. He holds 40 patents, is a best-selling author of both science fiction and non-fiction books, including a threat casting textbook, Future You, War, Wizards and Robots, and 21st Century Robot. He is a frequent commentator on the BBC, Bloomberg, PBS, Fox News, the Discovery Channel, and has been featured in the Scientific American, Forbes, Inc. and Popular Science. You have also, and it boggles the mind, directed 2 feature films, is an illustrator and a commissioned painter. What don't you do? But we are here, to talk all things future. I mean, you had a phenomenal session earlier this week, but thank you so much for coming to join us. We're going to take the kiddie gloves off. I've been told we can ask Professor anything.
Yes, that's what so having done this for 30 years, believe me, being a futurist and it's standing up in front of people and saying, you can ask me anything, because I learned very early on, they will.
Okay.
Oh, they'll ask you anything. So I'm up for it.
All right, in the spirit of rules don't apply, if there were 3 territories where we are going to have to truly throw the baby out with the bathwater in terms of our conventional wisdom over the next 10 years, what would those 3 be?
So it'd be remiss without saying we should talk about AI, which is what my talk was about here and all that, and that's one.
Yep.
I've got a little bit of different slant in how I think about AI, having worked on AI for 20 plus years. I think another one is sort of the intersection between biology and technology. Sometimes called synthetic technology, sometimes called genetics. It just depends upon. But there's this really interesting world that I've been tracking since about 2013 that I think will fundamentally change how we think of biology and information and things like that. And then ultimately, I think the final one would be, human creativity, the power of human creativity.
Let's start at the end and work backwards, because I think we could drown an hour's worth of discussion on AI. So why is creativity being thrown out with the baby?
Radically changed, not thrown out. I think how we think about creativity, all these technologies that are happening and the sort of the value of them, the fact that we need to keep human beings at the center. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that human beings are amazing with is creativity. And how we value that creativity, how we value humans, like how we actually, so what do we value them? I mean, for many times, human beings were treated like machines. They were just doing a task, or they were just giving birth, or they were just doing this. They were treated in this way. And as we have all of these technological changes coming, it's pushing us to radically think differently about what humanity is. And I don't think in a bad way. I actually think in a way, like when I talk about robots or AI or synthetic biology or anything like that, if those things take over tasks that human beings are doing, well, that's great, because that means you were being turned into a machine. So let's not turn people into machines. Let's actually value humanity. And so I think it's one of the most uncomfortable things is starting to look at humanity and think about, all right, how are we valuing it? How are we doing? And one of the things that I love about humanity is the creativity, is our humor. is the things that make us uniquely, the sort of the culture that makes us uniquely human and how we interact with each other. And for me, that just becomes more and more amplified.
And so in your mind, you don't think we're anywhere near, artificial intelligence as being able to at least replicate synthetic humor or, synthetic creativity?
They can. I mean, that's one of the things, right, with the Turing test that from Alan Turing was sort of saying, the basis of, can this machine think, was really based upon the idea, can it fool you into thinking it's thinking, right? Well, okay, that's cool. And Turing was cool, but that's not thinking. That's pretending like it's thinking. And again, a machine, it could pretend like it's a human, that's fine, but it's not.
Yeah, it's the illusion of nothing.
Yeah, it's the illusion of humanity. I mean, again, I built really weird little robots that did really weird little things because when they do really weird little things, you like them more because humans do really weird little things. Like they tell people, what I love about humans, you take 1 + 1 = 2 is math, right? That's a machine can do that. 1 + 1 = avocado is a very human thing because you have creativity. You're like, I never saw that coming. And that's the thing I think is really interesting. Human beings are just weird. And I love that weirdness.
And so what's the big from-tos when it comes to human creativity then over the next 10 years? What are the rules we've got to throw out?
I think it's unlocking it. I think it's really unlocking how creative we can actually be. That's what all these technologies and all these things are allowing us to do. And by radically reimagining what it means and radically reimagining how we value it, it means that it becomes so much broader. Like what we come up with, the stories that we come up with, how we tell stories, how we interact with people, who we interact with, radically changes. And that to me is so far out there that I don't even know. As an author and as a futurist, those are the things for me. You mentioned what are the three things, that are a kind of a singularity of a sort, right? Based on the singularity, not the text singularity, right? The singularity from physics, which is the point of which on a black hole you cannot see the other side of. Sorry, I am a professor and a physics nerd. So you cannot see the other side of that. That's the thing to me, what does that look like? I don't 100% know because human beings are so odd. Believe me, all you have to do is go to work with kids.
1 + 1 = avocado.
I know, and that's normal to them. They'll look at you and be like, BDJ, of course it equals avocado. I mean, that's why, I will never build robots with adults ever again. So I had this project called 21st Century Robot. It was around 2015, 2016. It was building a platform, an open source platform, to build these weird little robots. My robot was Jimmy, and he just did odd things. He told jokes. So I started building them with kids, and it was a kit. So you could go, and there was a whole manifesto, like how do you build a robot? And I would sit down with these kids and be like, well, what's your robot's name? And they would say, oh, okay, they'd write it down. And I was like, okay, so what does your robot look like? Draw me a picture. They draw me a picture. And I was like, okay, what would your robot do that nobody else's could do? And they'd write that down. I was like, now tell me a story about your robot. What would your robot do while you were at school? And they'd write that down. And I was like, give that to me. I was like, you have just written an engineering spec to build a robot, and now we're going to go build that robot. You gave it a name, you drew me some specs, and I made them tools so they could turn those into 3D designs. They could then go and download apps so they could do all of that. So we're building robots with kids, and this one boy, his name was Jay, and I said, Jay, what are you building? And he was building a spider robot. So they're kind of creepy. Cool. So it looks like a spider and it goes, but he made it cute. He made it like a steampunk. So it had a top hat and a monocle. So it was a big spider with a top hat and a monocle. And I said, what's your robot going to do that nobody else's would do? It is. But remember, he was very young. He's about 8. And I was like, what will your robot do that nobody else's will do? And he goes, oh, well, my robot tells jokes. And I was like, cool. So will your robot tell good jokes or bad jokes? Because I love bad jokes. And he looked at me like I was an idiot. And he said, BDJ, he's going to have a switch in the back of his head, and it's going to say good jokes and bad jokes. And I was like, mic drop, this kid's a genius. A physical switch on a steampunk spider that tells good jokes and bad jokes. Why would you ever build robots with an adult ever again?
When do we lose that spark? Is the secret to success in an AI-led future rekindling our youthfulness, our childhood,
I think it's beyond that. I think we can find it in youth, but it's rekindling our weirdness. It's rekindling 1 + 1 = avocado. I think we live, rightfully so in many ways, in a place where we have culture and decorum and rules, right? And that's good because it kind of greases the skids of how we sort of live in the world, right? And that's okay. Yeah. But losing that weirdness and that quirkiness, I think it kind of does get ground out of us because we do have to live in big cities, right? And you can't sort of, run around half naked with an ostrich head on in a big city. It just doesn't work.
I love that where you've landed is the magic is where rules don't apply.
Exactly.
Let's talk biohacking and the intersection of biology and technology, because I think this is a fascinating space that's really starting to get to the forefront of not just the global discussion, but the longevity discussion, and this shift towards functional medicine and, the extension of life. Same question again. What are the rules that we have to throw out, right? How are the rules not applying anymore in this space?
So in the work that I do, I always call it, and I've written about this before, I call it a Copernican moment.
Okay.
So based on Copernicus, right? So imagine that moment when Copernicus remapped the universe in his head. All of a sudden he saw it. And you can't unsee that. Like all of a sudden, nothing, you can't go back. So it's kind of this sort of, what is that moment where you have to remap everything?
Yeah.
And so for me, it was 2013. I was reading in the journal Nature a story about this lab that had taken all of Shakespeare's sonnets, Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, and a picture of themselves standing outside the lab. They had digitized it all, turned it into ones and zeros. Then they had converted that into DNA. And they had changed that over to DNA, and then they had printed it on a carbon printer, and then they had stuck it in an E. coli, a bacteria.
Yeah.
And they let that bacteria live and do what a bacteria does. It basically lives and eats and poops and multiplies. And so they let it go for about 4 generations. And so it became a new organism. They pulled the DNA out, and they translated it back to ones and zeros with 100% accuracy. What? What that meant was, in the article, they said, we could have a doomsday hard drive, so you can take all your stuff and turn it into DNA and put it into a plant and stuff like that. And I was like, no. What has just happened is the veil, the line between the digital and the biological has completely fallen down. We now as human beings can move back and forth as freely as ever, being able to, like with synthetic biology, be able to come up with new DNA on a laptop, print it out, and make it. I have a friend of mine by the name of Dr. Andrew Hessel. He was doing an open source cancer treatment where you were taking somebody's cancer, figuring out how to kill it, and then making its own DNA, putting it in a virus, and then infecting it and killing the virus. So your specific DNA.
Yeah, and then they were using cancer as the ultimate viral killer because you could program a cancer to basically pinpoint.
And so that's the thing to me. And so again, wind that out. So to your question, wind that out 5, 10, 15, 25 years. That sort of means that, in one way, the physical world is just a hard drive for the online world. Like you could begin to see, this is not Dan.
That's the wild.
This is just the hard drive of Dan. And then what does that mean then when you can then take that into the digital world, make some changes, make some modifications, and then move back again? What does that mean in an age of abundance when you can print out anything or grow anything? We're starting to see that with lab-grown meats and things like that. There's so many things that we could do. And again, for me, it's another one of those Copernican moments where I'm like, when I talk to the synthetic biologists and the scientists and people who I do a lot of work with, they agree, but they can't even comprehend. Their imagination doesn't go that far because many of them remember a day when gene splicing was actual gene splicing. You were actually splicing it, right? And their brains cannot even think about that it all becomes computer programming.
What are the afflictions that plague us today that you think are going to go the way of the dodo? And then what are the ones that you think might supplant them? Or are we moving to a world where physical ailments become a thing of the past because we can program a coli to store our data and then pull it back out?
It's interesting to speculate on that because I don't know 100% on that. I have no problem saying I don't know. Exactly. Yeah. I think it's interesting that how I think about this as a futurist, right? What I would say is, if here we are today, and you ask me that question in the future, I think we're going to be surprised by what we can fix and by what we can't fix. Right, and so I'll give you a story around that. So I was doing work with a bunch of retirees in Arizona. So I'm Arizona State University, doing a bunch with the retirees. And it was a kind of calm evening where they got together and just asked me a bunch of questions. And so I went and we were talking about artificial intelligence and brain and intelligence mapping and all that type of stuff. And then somebody says to me, we're going to be able to replace the human brain and we're going to be able to go and, make our own brain because we're going to have these own things. And I see this gentleman gentleman in the back, very tall, very thin, white hair with this big grin on his face. And I know that grin. And I was like, sir, you're grinning because you know something that we don't know. And he goes, yeah. I said, could you please come talk to us? So he comes down. And I said, what do you do? And he goes, I'm retired. And I said, what did you do before you retired? He said, oh, I'm a brain scientist. I said, oh, really? He said, yeah, I'm a brain scientist that specializes in dementia. I was like, oh, so what do you know about the human brain? And he said, very little. He said, I spent my entire career, and I can tell you, we know so little about our brains that this notion that we will be able to replace it and know all of it is ridiculous.
Presumptive.
Right, and so I think when we think about the human body, there's so much that we do know, which is great, and there's so many things that we will be able to fix, but there's so much that we don't know, right? There's so many things, and I would never be so arrogant to be like, we're going to cure all diseases by this day. It'd be awesome if we could, but I just know in that, when I know some of those experts who go, there's so many things that we just don't know.
That was a very well articulated sideways through the question. Cancer, for example, if I push you on that, how far are we from being able to really manage through what is, from the outside looking in, looks like this proliferation of cancers across, society?
So again, I don't know. So, but what I can tell you is, right, we do have cancers that we have cured, right? There are cancers that we've gone through and cured. So I think it's that sort of endless progression, again, as I extrapolate out, that again, as we have ones that are more simple, the ones that are not as complex, that yes, we will continue to knock those down. So people will continue to kind of knock those down. And probably more where you can begin to see people not actually maybe treating the cancer, but understanding the conditions that then lead to that cancer. I think that is also an area that's really interesting, of being able to model that. Because that is a lot of the predictive modeling that people are doing, of being able to say, okay, these are the environmental states. I do work with the Center for Disease Control back in the United States, where we're looking at the kind of whole of ecosystem of somebody's life to understand, oh, that cancer wasn't just this one thing, or it wasn't just random. There were all these other factors that went into it. So I do think there's something sort of on the other side of the cancers, even before you get them, that we can be much more preventative. Much like lung cancer, much like and skin cancer. There's a lot of things that we know. I think it would be really fascinating for us to model those again over the next 10 years.
What about longevity? I mean, there's a lot of rhetoric in the media at the moment around, the first person to live to 150 has already been born. Do you subscribe to that theory?
So in the work that I do, I talk to subject matter experts all the time on this, right? And they tell you, getting to 100, easy, we can do that, right? Getting to 125, harder. Getting to 150 is really, really hard, right? Really for in mass to be able to produce that, right? There's still going to be those people who have the genes and the genetics to kind of go to be able to do it. So yeah, I'm skeptical of that and what I've known. I've also, in talking to scientists who do work in longevity, many of them say, we are biological beings. We are meant to exit the stage. Which also is very hard for a lot of people to accept. Death is very, very scary, right? And especially as a futurist, and even in some of the writings that I've done, I actually have interviewed futurists about death, right? It's the one prediction that we can all get right, right? You will die, right? And so talking to them, and it's really interesting getting that idea around people think about death and deal with death. And I think oftentimes when we're having these discussions about longevity, it's kind of a coded philosophical conversation around the fear of death.
All right, let's go back to the starting block, AI. What's the conversation that we should be having but not?
So with artificial intelligence, as you know, I just wrote a book for 8-year-olds about AI, which is so much fun because I love working with kids, because when you talk to 8-year-olds, you have to tell them the truth. They're smarter than you think, and you can't BS, right? You cannot. Also, you can't be pessimistic. You can't tell them that we're all going to die and it's going to be a hellscape because of AI, because who does that to an 8-year-old? You're a jerk if you did that to an 8-year-old, right? So don't do that. So I had to sit down and you just have a real chat with kids about AI. And so if somebody said to me, what is AI? It's software. We always have to remember that. So when you talk, it's just software. And it's software created by humans that is trained on data. That's it. It's not human at all. It doesn't think. This is a thing, one of the reasons why I wrote this is it really bothers me when we tell kids or anybody, oh, it's a machine that thinks. No, it's not thinking. You think, I think, we're humans. It doesn't think. So to me, as we think about it, we have to remember that it's just software. and that it's software that we use to accomplish tasks. Now, I'm not talking about artificial general intelligence. It's a completely different conversation. Most of the work that I do is what's kind of industrial AI. It just does work. With that in mind, I then go to people and say, okay, if it's just software and we're going to use it to solve problems, and amazing problems, big things, it's also going to be used for some nefarious and very bad things. I do my threat casting work. I spend a lot of time looking at very dark futures, which we can talk about. But so knowing that, we can totally go there. Knowing that, okay, so what is it? So we have this knowledge. We have the knowledge that pretty much all software is going to be using AI in 5, 10, 15 years. So even having a conversation about AI will be superfluous. It'll be sort of like being back when we used to call the internet the information superhighway.
Yep.
Right? It was just dumb. Like, why would you talk about that? Once you've done that, okay, what do we do now? And I always tell people, it's not about the AI. It's about the humans. AI is not going to take your job. It's not. A human's going to use AI to take your job. And being able to go through, so for me, I think we're having the wrong conversation when we're talking about AI. We're not talking about the human beings that are using AI, the corporations that are using AI. We're not talking about the power structures of AI. Who gets to use it? Who are they using it on? You can actually have power over that. I think the thing that is so disempowering for people, which really bothers me when we talk about AI, we imbue it with so much power and it's just going to take over. It's like, no, it's not. It's these human beings, and we know them. Like, we know where they live. We know where they work. We know what's going on. It makes it very grounding. Now, granted, it's not science fiction and this huge thing that's really fun, but it's very pragmatic. And I think that's the thing when it comes to AI. We need to remember the humans. We need to remember the pragmatism.
I think that is phenomenal advice, especially when, we're pumping the tires on the big spaghetti monster, so to speak, and disempowering the conversation that really moves the needle. Well,
and if you want to wind it out a little bit more on the nefarious threat side, it behooves people who do have it, who do want to exploit, who are using it for ill, who may just be trying to make a lot of money off of it, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with profit, to kind of go, well, don't look here, don't look here. Think about Terminator. Think about this. Think about all this. Nothing to see over here. Because there's business incentive, because there's reasons why that has nothing to do with that. Again, I'm not anti-business at all, but that idea of saying, why is somebody telling me this? This is what I always tell people. When somebody tells you a future that's very succinct and they're like, this is what your future is, like if somebody comes to your front door and says, this is what the future is, like slam the door in their face, because why are they coming and telling you this? Like, they've got to have a reason.
We're going to go into threat casting only because I think it's one of the coolest branding jobs done by ASU. For the layperson, for the everyday Australian, what would be the few things that we should be doing right now to prepare for an AI future? Or an AI present, let's be honest.
So for an AI future, I think it's understand what it is, fundamentally. Like get an understand exactly what it is.
And the best way to do that would be?
You could read my book. Or talk to experts. You've had people on the show who we've heard who I'm huge fans of, who have really talked about it. And that's one of the things that also I'm an optimist about AI, because 5 years ago we weren't having these conversations about AI. 5 years ago at different things like South by Southwest, like that, we weren't doing this. Like it was the far off future of AI. Now you have really pragmatic people who are going, no, it's about humans, and no, we need to think about the ethics, and we need to think about the corporation. So that allows us to kind of hem it in. So I think that's important. I think for everybody when it comes to AI, or even anything with technology, is to ask yourself, what is the future you want? What is the future you want to avoid? Instead of saying, how do I prepare? How do I hunker down and future-proof? To say, well, no, you have agency. You have the ability to build your future. So what do you want from it? You're going to have all these tools to do all these things. What do you want to do?
Yeah, take a more active role.
Yeah.
Before we get to bug out packs, because I think that's going to be a fun area, on the other side of the coin, what are the two things that we shouldn't be doing that's going to, distract us from staying in an active posture and getting wizened up to what's going on?
Well, I think the part of it is how we are educating our kids and ourselves.
Yep.
Right? And this is one of the things that AI has done, and one of the things that even a lot of this technology has done, so smartphones, Internet of Things. How we think about education is being fundamentally changed right now.
In what way?
Fundamentally changed. Well, a great example is with ChatGPT or Bard or anything like that, right? So people are having this moral dilemma around, oh my gosh, we can now have a 13-year-old write a term paper or a report using AI, and that this is a terrible thing. Well, yes, it is. Because why? in education, what a professor would tell you or a teacher would tell you, well, we need to make critical thinkers. And so how we make critical thinkers is we make them write term papers, and we make them write reports. Well, now the AI just wrote the report, and it turns out you weren't making them a critical thinker by having them write a term paper, you were making them a term paper machine, a machine that could write term papers. Yeah. And so again, it's forcing us to think about, okay, what does it mean to be a critical thinker? It forces us as educators to say, okay, we need to be better. We actually need to make people better critical thinkers. How do we have them apply these things? How do we have them communicate these things? There's a lot of areas where, whereas before we had leaned on what was there in the past, that all of that has gotten upended.
What are the ingredients of an incredible critical thinker?
I think it's, number one is curiosity. Like how do you...
It's on brand for South by Southwest Sydney?
Exactly. How do you encourage people to always be curious, always be, but also be curious about what makes themselves uncomfortable? That's a lot of the work that I do in threat casting, a lot of work that I do. Like I always tell my students, like if you find somebody you don't like, or if you find an issue that scares the heck out of you, go into it, run at it, right? Figure out why and go into it. So I think that's one part of it. And another huge part of it, which goes back to our creativity when we were talking before, is another thing I teach my students is you could be the best futurist ever. You could model the future perfectly. But if you can't communicate it to somebody else in a way that is actionable so they can do something about it, you're absolutely useless. And so the communication and how we communicate to different people, right? Because different people hear things differently. People are different readers or audio or or they're neurodivergent or things like that. And really understanding that communication is such a huge part, that storytelling is such a huge part of what we do.
And how we're wired.
Yeah. There was a great research study by evolutionary biologists who were thinking about why we have consciousness. And they did this research, and it wasn't do we have consciousness or does a goldfish have, and they were like, no, we have a thing. We're going to call that thing consciousness. Why? Why, from an evolutionary standpoint, why do we have it? And they basically said it all came back to stories. It came back to the ability for me to go, hey, Dan, if you want to get fish, go down to that stream and get this thing. You'll be like, oh, cool, thanks, BDJ. By the way, there's berries over there. Don't eat them. It's very bad if you eat them. We have just told ourselves stories that we transact in it. And if you actually think about how we communicate with people, at a different level, we're always telling stories back and forth. And that storytelling is so intensely human, it's great.
Let's get to threat casting. Let's widen our aperture. What should we be worried about and why?
So what threat casting is, right? So what I do with threat casting is I look 10 years out, I model a range of possible and potential futures, and I'm an applied futurist. So I do this for people. So I do it for organizations, for militaries, for governments, and things like that. And so in that way, it's usually, I'm going to need a little bit more. I'm going to need a little bit more because, again, I don't do all the threats, right? And so I've done a lot, but it's got to be a little bit more
I'm going to avoid
specific.
the military for many reasons.
Sure.
I'm on enough lists already, I assume. What about the everyday professional, right? You know, that wants to raise a family and is hoping for a future that is worth their children inheriting?
Well, I think the first step there goes back to asking yourself what that is. I think that's one of the things that we don't do much of, to say, well, you know, what is the future that you want? And I ask people all the time that, right? And as you and I were talking before we came out, that, you know, I wrote a self-help book, like for people to actually, for real, sit down and model your future. So it's exactly what you're talking to. And I've gone to people and say, well, what's the future you want? What's the future you want? Like, what's the future you want to give your kids, or what's the future you want to give yourself? And people kind of go, oh, I want it to be good. And I'm like,
I want it to be kind.
Yes, cool, I agree. Or I love this, I write about this in the book. I asked some woman about her career and her future. I was like, what do you want? And she goes, I don't know. I said, well, let's start big. Do you want to be rich? She said, yeah, okay. I was like, awesome, cool. I want you to be rich. What kind of rich do you want to be? And she looked at me again like I was crazy, which I'm used to. And I said, do you want to be yacht rich? Like, do you want to have a huge yacht, like with a crew and a captain and all that, like yacht rich? She goes, oh no, that sounds terrible. I don't want, that's too much. I was like, okay, cool. All right, next. Do you want to be mansion rich? Like, do you want a mansion? Maybe not a yacht, but like a big mansion. And with a staff. And she's like, oh no. And we worked it down to like what she wanted to be. And I'll tell you a side story. I was talking to another entrepreneur in San Francisco who at one point did tell me, I want to be mansion rich. And I was like, cool, okay, set your bar there. And then Many years later, he was very successful. I got a text from him. It was like,
Finally, mansion rich.
BDJ, mansion rich, exclamation point. He had done really well for himself. That's great. Okay. So that idea, and it sounds very silly, but do it for yourself. Like, it's one of the things that I hear couples do all the time, where you get together and say, what is the future we want? And then you have to write it down. And I think it's important. I'm a word nerd. I write a lot of books, but I'm also a science fiction nerd. But I like writing things down because it's in your own handwriting. And in a way, when you go back and read it, it's your past you talking to your future you of saying what you actually want. And you see the humanity in it. And writing it down then allows you to go back and go, do I still believe this? And being very specific is so important. So even when I ask people, okay, how do you want to have that future for your child? I would say, so what does a Tuesday look like for your child? And so I think defining it is the first step. Yeah. That's really
tightening the brief.
Yeah, because you really need to know what it is.
All right, let's play with this. If the thing that matters most is a future where there is a better spread of the abundance, right? Where we don't have that, where, I think one of the biggest worries that I've got is we're seeing a big pull between the haves and the have-nots, and that's, pull upward, and then, the bottom 50% having, a much, much smaller representation of the wealth, of access to, basic essential services. In a future where we've reversed that trend, what do you see as the big threats that are pulling against a world where abundance is more decentralized and deconcentrated? There's
a great science fiction book written by a friend of mine, Cory Doctorow, which is about exactly that.
Okay.
It's about exactly that. In a post-abundant world where you could have everything. You have everything you want. And there's this great line in the book where he actually says, because the name of the book is Walk Away. And there's a great line in the book which is very Cory, which is, well, nobody said abundance would be easy. That idea that human beings are still flawed. Yeah. Right? That's the thing, that human beings, although we're awesome and amazing, we're still flawed. We still have all the different problems that we have and sort of how we're brought up. Abundance isn't going to change all of that. We have sort of cultural problems and racial problems and economic problems, that you still have a lot of that stuff. And so I'm not blinded by the fact that abundance is going to fix everything.
It's not the solve.
Yeah, and again, abundance again is a bit of a fairy tale, but yes, we can get to there's some of it. Yeah. But that idea of understanding that so much of what we're sort of working on is who we are as human beings. So part of when I coach people about, okay, you want to make a better world for your kids, your community, your country, that's great. It's also understanding what you have power over, right? So don't put the weight of the world on just on yourself. And there's a great futurist. He's also thinks of himself as a presentist, that he does a lot of work where he works with refugees. Or he works with people who are, his name is Douglas Rushkoff. So Doug's amazing, and he wrote a great book called Present Shock. And he will work with them, and they're in crisis. They literally are in crisis. And he will say, put both feet on the ground, stand up. You have control over that. Next, put your hands up over your head, move your body. You can do that. And he does this thing where he builds, like, how much control do you have? Like, what can you actually do? Can you fix the income gap for all of Australia right now? No, you can't do all of that. Right? And start understanding what you have control over. And turns out there's a lot, and especially for your family and for your kids and for your community, like understanding there's things that you could do there, but then also understanding there is very specific things that you can do for your community, for your country, for the world. But make sure you cut yourself some slack. That ability, like, yes, you need to vote. Yes, you can become an activist. Yes, there's some things you can do, but understand where your power lies.
That's such an interesting process. All right, what else can we do? You spoke earlier this week about, thinking like a futurist, and I think you've just given us probably one of the cornerstones of that, which is get real tight on the future that you want.
Yeah.
What else can we do to anticipate what's to come and prepare for a world that, where we either want to make it a better place or at least thrive within the confines of that future?
So there's a construct that I've written about where you sort of think about that future and you get really specific.
Yep.
And then you start, so again, we talked before, being a critical thinker, always being curious, being a present in your world. That's incredibly important. Oftentimes people aren't present in their world, they're very insular. So being present in your world is very important, and present in your future. The next is to say, who's on your team?
Okay.
So who are the people who are going to help you to achieve this future that you want? Your family, your friends, all of that type of stuff. And then you need to go to those people and tell them your future. Tell them your story. Hey, this is what I'm thinking. What are you thinking? two things will happen. Number one, your really good friends will go, oh, mate, that's cool. You might want to think about this, or you might want to think about that. You might want to change it a little bit. I can help you, but let's think about that. You'll also identify toxic people. You'll also identify people who will go, you can't do that. Thank them, say, thank you very much, and then jettison them as quickly as possible. Now, many of them might be members of your extended family. You can't get rid of them completely, but do know that they're not going to help you, and that's fine, right? You may have to see them during the holidays, and that's fine, but they're not going to help you. So understand that this is your squad, these are your team. The next is to think about, what are the tools that are going to help me get there? And tools can be technologies, but tools can also be things like this podcast. It can be things like South by Southwest. Like there's actual platforms that will help you stay present in your world. Think about these things. There are professional organizations and trade associations. There's lots of things that you can do and become active in that can help you actualize what you're trying to get to.
Build that muscle.
Yeah. And then finally is identify the experts. Who are the people maybe who don't live in your future who have gotten there, but who might be your neighbors, right? So you can go to them and say, hey, you'd be surprised the power of that story about your future to somebody who's gotten there. They'll give you a half an hour. They'll have a coffee or a tea with you because they know that they got where they were on the backs and shoulders of other people, that it's all about their social network. And they'll kind of help you refine it. So once you've done that, so now you've identified your team, your tools, your experts, you refine that, you backcast. And this is the really important part. To say, okay, if this is where I want to be from myself, my family, or wherever, and this is where I am today, what's the thing that's going to tell me that I'm halfway? For a lot of people, that might be getting a degree. Some people, that might be a job. Some people, that might be buying a house or getting a home, whatever. So you write that down. And then split it again. Say, well, what will get me partway? So what's a thing that I can get to maybe in a couple of years or a year or so that'll show me that I'm on the right path, but I can really set it, right? So it could be entering school, it could be saving, it could be all the things. And then I say, okay, so what is the thing that you can do on Monday? What's the thing that you can do on Monday? Little tiny thing. Do a search about something. You know, if it has to do with schooling, call a couple of schools, go to their websites, talk to their admissions director, like things that will take no time, no money or whatever. But you will see that very quickly you are taking the steps
like
that will get
interest.
you. You will just get there. And that was one of the things in the feedback when I talk to people about this, that they say, wow, I feel like I can actually do that now, right? You've got this, but it's far enough out that you can take these small steps. But it's having that longer term plan, which is super helpful. And that's thinking like a futurist. That really is that. So you're not questioning. You're like, nope, that's the future I want. And it might change a little bit, and that's fine. But it gives you something to shoot for.
I think that's wonderful advice. I've got a curly one that I want to end on.
Okay.
If that's all right.
Yeah.
What do you hope your legacy is going to be when it comes to supporting people across the globe build a better future?
There's only one thing I want. And it's the thing that has driven me the majority of my career. It started actually when I was at the Intel Corporation. I was younger, young futurist, coming up, wanted to make change in the world, coming out of Silicon Valley. And I said I wanted to, as a futurist, fundamentally change how people acted and interacted with technology. I wanted to make it more human. And so that's why I went to Intel. That's why I sort of went all over the world, traveled all over the world. And as I was exiting Intel back in 2016, I was talking to the chairman of the board, who was a mentor of mine. And he said, you know, why were you doing this? And I said, I wanted to fundamentally change how people interacted. I wanted to get humans at the center. And at that time, we had really changed Intel. And he said, well, you did that. Obviously, you didn't set the bar high enough. What do you really want to do? And I didn't know. And it freaked me out. Right? I'm a futurist. It freaked me out. And I just thought about it for a while, and I realized that I wanted to fundamentally change how people acted and interacted with their future. I wanted everybody to know that they had the agency, the ability to build their own future. That's the thing that scares me the most about the future, is that when people give up that agency, when they let other people design their future for them, that does not go well. And I watch it happen. It's a spark in people's eyes. When I go, I can talk to kids, I can talk to retirees, or anybody, when they realize, oh, I can take these steps and fundamentally make the future better, make it better for myself, for my family, for my community. That to me is incredibly important, because if we're actively building our future, generally we're building a future that's awesome. We're actually building a future that's great. There's very few people who want to build a really nasty, horrible, terrible future. There's another word for those, and we can deal with them later, right? You can put that with the military folks, right? So, but that idea actually is a generative act, and that generative act is usually very positive. And so to me, leaving that behind, and that's what I spend almost every day doing. It's why I'm here. It's why I have all these conversations, is that to get everybody to know that they have that ability to shape their future.
I think that is a profound purpose and a wonderful note to end on. Thank you so much, Professor. Ladies and gentlemen, Brian Johnson. Thank you so much, mate.
Yeah.